Welcome to episode number 1, number 2. I don't know. Last one was the pilot, but this is the next episode of the Veto. I think we're going to stick with the names, so enjoy that. You'll probably see a different kind of overlay this time. The last one was a bit crap, but we're going to go over it again and improve it a little. So Wolfie's here again, same as last time. You know who he is. Don't worry about that. So I think let's just fly straight into this one. Let's not waste any time. The big story, I guess, of the week for me is probably NiP. They come into the Blast groups with some sort of weird standing situation. Twist comes out, goes to the bench, and then we have a player from their academy team essentially comes up in ZTR. And then there's a lot of people on Twitter saying this is going to be a disaster. Maui will call him out. Why not? He said it's going to be a train wreck. Why ZTR on this team? They go into this game versus Astralis where probably nobody who's sane would have picked them to win. But in this game, NiP 2-0 win over Astralis. That's probably the biggest upset I've seen for a long time, I think. So before we talk about NiP in general over Blast, let's just talk about this game alone because that's, crazy enough. So tell me, when you saw this result, first reaction, tell me what you thought of this crazy matchup.
I mean, the words sort of escape you when you look at the teams that are facing each other and then the end result. I think from memory, ZDR had a pretty blinding first map as well. He was consistently middle of the pack, not as blinding as I remember it, 25 and 21. But yeah, I mean, obviously immediately a shock and you sort of start going, well, how the fuck have they changed one player and suddenly this entire system works? But you look at the NiP squad, and for the longest time, you've looked at them and gone, they've got so much firepower. They just don't seem to be able to click it into place. There seems to be something missing somewhere. And I mean, it was almost voodoo to try and work out what it was. You looked at the team on paper, it made a decent amount of sense. The players should have been popping and they weren't. So I don't mind them just making a fairly random change. Let's go with Twist. I'm not Twist's biggest fan, but he's a solid player. ZTR comes in, and as much as he wasn't popping, the players around him just seemed to click on another level. I mean, Nork, first map, 23 kills, Hampers with 22 behind him. Then on Inferno, Rez just plays like an utter god. Nork starts showing up again on the AWP. And for Astralis, they just didn't seem to have an answer. I mean, Dupree put them on his back on map 1, which was Overpass, and tried his goddamn hardest to carry them through it, but even dropping a 30 bomb wasn't going to be enough. And I think the wind sort of went out of Astralis' sails a little bit, in all honesty. They're coming into Inferno. It's traditionally a very strong map for them. It's traditionally one that it suits their play style, right? There's so many opportunities with executes. You can be so clinical. And it just didn't quite happen. I think, honestly, they were probably expecting to cruise it. And NiP took full advantage, but all credit to them. I mean, what a performance to start off with your new roster.
Yeah, I don't know actually, what is the roster situation? I presume ZTR is not... I had a look earlier and I can't really see anything about it. It just seems like he just sort of appeared in the team.
They've signed him now. They've said he's going to permanent it now.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, yeah, he was probably under contract with them anyway, so it's probably a fairly easy transition. But if I had to guess from their end, it's, let's try this guy out for 3 months and see what happens. So I do actually know a little bit about ZTR. He's a very, very young player, and he played, so Jack, the player that's now on Fnatic, he played with him a bit over the last year or so, and I've actually watched that team play a few times. They were called Primer, and they played quite a few ESEA Advanced seasons, the one below MDL. I watched a few of their games, and they look like any other advanced teams where they just haven't got that much structure or all of this sort of stuff. And ZTR was the cooler for them. So at least from a calling perspective, I never was that excited by him as a player. But individually, he always looked fairly good. And for somebody as young as him, you can just mold him into whatever you want.
Yeah.
So at least from the NiP team perspective, they've been up and down for a while. They had some good results. I mean, I think they were top 4 at Cologne, which of course of last year probably panned out as one of the biggest events of the whole year, given the pandemic and everything. So that was definitely a great result. But regardless, coming into this series, obviously nobody would ever have predicted that. And in terms of bigger upsets than that game, I struggle to think of many, to be honest, for a long time. I remember at Flashpoint, Envy were playing big in the first round of the playoffs, and that game went very, very close. And if Envy hadn't have lost some like anti-ecos and anti-force buys, they'd probably win that series. I remember talking in the green room with people who were like, this could be the biggest upset for a long time. And that's the only, even that one didn't even happen. And that's the only one in my head that I can recall in recent memory that's even comparable to this sort of result. From the Astralis perspective, there's definitely a conversation here of how they come off winning a tournament. Like, I can't think what it would have been, probably about a week prior. And they've got to play again in a massive long format tournament. Yeah. So there's questions of, motivation, and with the blast system of how the tournament works, you can fall out of the groups here and you're not out of the tournament. You go into their showdown, whatever you'd call it, like smaller section of the tournament. And then
sort of thing.
Yeah. So from some aspects from the Astralis side, you can clearly see that, they probably came into this game with very limited prep in the first place. And of course, as soon as you get a roster move, everything's out the window. You have no idea what you're going up against. So from the Astralis perspective, you can see some aspects where they might have issues and flaws, but for a team like Astralis with monstrous fundamentals, you just think they just sort of roll over NiP. Even if they had twists in the lineup, even if they had none of these changes going on, you still think they just roll over them. So very, very surprising result. And obviously from the NiP perspective, absolutely crazy. And for someone like ZTR, you couldn't really ask for a better game. And even if he doesn't stay in this NiP lineup, he's probably secured his whole career, to be honest, at least for the next year or so, just off this one match. That's just like how this stuff works, where, you just have like one good result and you're just going to be constantly put around the top 3 or 4 Swedish teams continuously. Like, if Heap doesn't do anything good, they'll just replace him with ZTR if he fell out of NiP or something. Like that's the sort of thing that would happen now, just off this sort of result. So that's what happened with that game. And then throughout the rest of this group stages, they beat Big in the upper bracket game, but then again, when they met Big in the final, we sort of returned to normality. So do you have any other comments overall on NiP, or have we covered them in that Astralis discussion?
I think that second Big game where they got rolled 2-0, it was a little unfortunate for them. When you watch them the first time coming up against Big, their overpass looked shaky. And if memory serves, it took them a pretty monumental comeback to take it to overtime to then win in OT. So that to go 16-14 Big's way feels like NiP almost saying we're here to stay. Obviously, they don't manage to take the win again. It's not that good, but they still put up a fighting performance. And then I'm just trying to look for the stats on Vertigo because, Jesus, they got found out on Vertigo. It's something like 16-2. On Vertigo. That's just a team who've not practiced a map, isn't it? If you're going to get rolled that hard by Big, it's just that you've not got any experience, you've not got any practice. And watching that map, it really did look that way. There was a lot of, specifically what sticks out is Keto boosting up on T side, up the B staircase to peak towards Wood. And NiP just had no fucking idea he could do that. So he got a free kill from that. Then that's just a straight entry into the B site off the back of it. And it was little things like that you saw happening time and time again. And you were like, okay, NiP just don't know Vertigo. So let's discard that from the discussion. They did fantastically well on Overpass first and second time around against Big. And I think if the map pool had been just a little bit more favorable for NiP, if they'd maybe managed to drag the Veto away from Vertigo, we could have realistically been seeing a 3-map series. We could have been seeing them putting up some serious fight again. So I think they've put their foot down. They've said, we're here. We're going to fight. It's going to be really intriguing over the next sort of 2, 3, 4 months to see if this honeymoon period can turn into something a lot stronger and a lot more solid in the foundation to build into 2021.
So there's another angle I want to take with this kind of NiP discussion. And to get into this one, we need to talk about Gen G, which is the obvious segue at this point in the show. We need to talk about Gen G, okay? So this is good. So I need to get this off my chest because it's been pissing me off for like 2 months. Right, so in the opening game of Flashpoint Season 2 of the group that Gen G are in, they beat OG. It was a 2-0 game, and this actually would be another contender, probably for the biggest upset for a very long time. It's just because Astralis should be the best team in the world that we're saying this is absolutely insane. But like in this game, this was an absolutely mental upset, right? And after this upset happened at Flashpoint, I had people telling me for like a whole week that this is incredible for the tournament. This is so good for the tournament. I had fucking Freya, I had Monty, I had other people high up in the production telling me for like a week that this is great, that Gen G is winning games. and they're like putting in great results in this group where they thought that like it was going to be a done deal. They were out last. Now they're performing. This is great. Now I sat there the whole time thinking, this is like my worst nightmare, Gen.G winning this game. And I'll explain why. It's because a team with 5 days of practice and 2 stand-ins was able to beat a team like OG. And we know OG's had some problems, but at the end of the day, with Valde, Alexi B, MBK, these sort of players, same lineup for whatever, 10 months at that point, they should just be smashing a team with no practice and barely any strats or whatever, and one map, fucking map pool with only train. Like, it should have just been a done deal. So, like, in my head, this was like the worst possible nightmare than winning this game. And I had people the whole time telling me this was like incredibly great. And I kind of feel the same way about this result. Not as much, but I still feel like if you accept the premise that this result's really great and it's epic and, you know, NiP are great and they've done amazing in this game, you've also got to kind of accept the premise that, you know, you're kind of undermining the whole game. A team with a recent roster move comes out and beats the best team in the world 2-0. Like, if that can happen, why do we have stable rosters? Why do we practice loads? Why do we do all of this? So as soon as you accept, you know, the NiP's incredible, you've got to take this other angle at the same time. That's kind of the problem with me for this game. And to be honest, when I saw this game, people aren't going to like this, but my first reaction was, you know, this is online CS at the end of the day. And, you know, this wouldn't have happened on LAN. I'm just sorry. I just don't see it ever happening on LAN, this sort of result. So, yeah, as much as NiP played well and all of this sort of stuff, I don't want to take anything away from them. They had great performances. I've given these reasons as well why Astralis might have had issues. But I can't help seeing this result and thinking back to that Gen.G game and just being like, something's not right with CS at the moment. I want to get back to the LANs, you know, the best of threes, the stage games, the pressure's on, the Plopskis of the world are having their issues because they haven't got, you know, the experience. As much as some people hate to see the young players crumbling, I want to see that progression. I don't want to see someone coming in their first game and beating the best team in the world, you know? You know, bit of a downer. But, you know, I just thought I'd make that point because, yeah, everyone's going to be on like the NiP hype train and, you know, this probably won't be repeatable, to be honest. They came in unsighted, they had a new player, and after they get, you know, studied and found out, they'll not be as good. They'll be about as good as the same lineup, I'm guessing, in the end. But hopefully, at least from the ZCR perspective, he's probably got a lot of growth he can do. Still, I think he was definitely 16 or 17 a year ago, so he can't be more than 18 now. So at least from that perspective, and there's 2 or 3 players on that NiP team who, you know, even though you've seen them for a year and a half now, they're still very young players. Someone like Nork, for example. I remember hearing Fret talk about him. He said that when Fret came back into the team, this was about a year ago, and he saw Nork, he thought, this guy's a big risk. Maybe he's not going to work. And even Fret was thinking, you know, maybe we're going to have to make a change. And then Nork just comes out and he's a great player with basically no experience at that time. So he's someone that's flourished really well on this team. Presumably Fret's a big part of that. And hopefully ZCR can do the same because, you know, Sweden's also a scene where for a long time we've just been recycling some starting. And only now we starting to get this new wave in. And, you know, maybe someone like Broland did a lot for their scene of just showing that you can trust these younger players to work. So from that whole angle, good stuff. Let's see some more Swedish players. So let's stay on the topic of Blast. Winner of the group was Big. And Big as a team, of course, we know in the middle of last year, spring to summer sort of time, probably the best team in the world. They had a really good run of 3 or 4 events, if I remember correctly. Plenty of titles in the middle of there. Players like Serson, absolutely phenomenal. Tabson was calling, great individually. And of course, Antara is always skilled. So during that period, looked good. End of the year, it's not like they were, you know, disastrously bad or whatever. It was more like they've fallen out of being a tournament contender, and now we're looking at 5th, 6th place team in the tournament, top 4 a best day, 8th place a bad day, but they're always going to be a playoff contention, but not anymore. We talk about Big as being, you know, a contender with Vitality or Astralis or even Na'Vi when they started getting stuff together as a team that could really contend for titles. So from the Big perspective, obviously this isn't a massive tournament, it's just a group stage, but just from their angle of beating Astralis in a series and actually taking the group stages, you know, what does this say about Big? And if we can discern that much, what should we expect from Big moving forwards?
It's an interesting one again, because as much as Big looked solid once they'd got a handle on things, I think them losing that initial 2-0 to NiP really, for me, again, puts a dampener on sort of what they achieved. I mean, obviously, everybody looked at the Astralis big matchup and went, okay, Astralis are winning that, right? Then it will be Astralis NiP. Astralis will take that. They're through. Good job. Astralis strikes again. But I don't know, big, as much as they convince me immensely at times, and I watch them on Inferno springs to mind with Searson just absolutely popping on the AWP and a nice solid framework around him of riflers, that just works on so many levels for me. But then there's other maps, and Overpass sort of springs to me as I don't know what goes wrong, but it's just two completely different teams. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the Searson pickup. He is clearly a very, very talented AWPer, and he can absolutely smash a roster. And when he's doing that, Big seem to almost rally around it, right? They've got this one-star player. He takes all the pressure off everybody else. And then you see the other individuals, you know, the Xantares, he had a good series against Astralis, even Tizian popping off in places. And it almost takes the pressure off of those extra players to be able to play more into their own style. I think Big really struggle when Searson isn't having that killer day, when he's a little bit quieter on the AWP, when they don't have that real spearhead to their attack. It certainly, at least to me, seems like with the extra pressure on the likes of Xantares, on the likes of Tizian, hell, even on the likes of Keto, right? The only player you can really let off is go, okay, if Tabson's calling, then he gets a pass on the fragging. It feels like as soon as that pressure starts to come down to the second, third, fourth players, they start to drop off. And my only concern with them is that has to be addressed at some point, right? You can't be the Vitality of the world where you go, Zywoo, go kill with the AWP, and we'll just frag okay around you. You've got to have bailout options, is what I call them. You've got to have a second player, a third player who can step up. I think VP at the moment have a fantastic example of that. You've got Yekindar always popping. If he's not showing up, Buster's showing up. If Buster's not showing up, then Kika and Jame can take the strength of it. You need that depth in your roster. Yes, you can have a superstar player, but you need players behind him to pick up the slack. And for me, I know this is a little harsh, Xantares and Tizian need to be doing a little bit more when Searson isn't. I've been very harsh, very savage against Big there. They were incredible. They did look really, really good. I just worry that moving forwards, you can't have that reliance on Searson.
Yeah. Big is always a weird team. They're always a weird team for me to watch because in terms of, if you only look at the game from certain perspectives, so in terms of like their set strategies, their utility, their coordination on some of the set rounds, their late round executes, like they really might be the best team in the world in some of these aspects. And so many things about the way they play. They've got such good fundamentals at times. They're very good at knowing how to play man up, how to play man down. They're clearly well coached. We know Toby came out now, but he still had a lot of influence on that team. And hopefully, his protege and dude or whatever his name, what a weird alias. Hopefully he can, pick up the mantle as that was and keep them moving forward. So this is the kind of problem I've had with Big for the whole period of the end of last year, is there's so many reasons to think this team should be good. There's so many reasons to look at them and think they do so much shit right. They do so much right, and their set stuff is so good. Why are the results not always coming for them? Why sometimes is their map pool in question? Sometimes they've got 2 or 3 really killer maps, and sometimes other maps are just falling apart. And the thing about this event that was very, very promising is that a map that was kind of an Achilles heel for them was always Vertigo over the end of last year. Mm-hmm. Had a lot of issues on the map. Clearly, from my perspective, Tabson didn't like calling on it, and it was quite obvious to me that he wasn't very comfortable mid-rounding on the map. So I've been watching quite a lot of their Vertigo. They only played 2, but I've watched them several times now because, spoiler alert, there's going to be a video on them fairly soon, so wait for that one. But watching them on T-side, I mean, like the amount of work they must have put in on Vertigo over like the holiday period over New Year's must be crazy. It must be weeks of practice into this map for how much better they look on it. So just from that perspective, instantly of the map pool, like the whole team's like, don't neglect how much one map can change a whole map pool. If you take a map from your 5th, 6th best map and make it your 2nd, 3rd, that is day and night. Where you can, in some matches up, they could pick into, if they were picking into Vertigo, they'd never pick into Vertigo at the end of last year. So instantly map pool's better. I think one aspect to talk about is Searson, whatever you want to call him. He's a tricky one because some games he is fucking unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like absolutely unreal. And from the whole perspective of you gotta I mean, I don't consider Sprout that high tiered team. In terms of like top tier play, top 15, top 10 in the world, he's really only played for just over a year. For someone that's played just over a year to be, he's not that consistent, but to be every tournament he has mega maps. Every tournament he's going to be in the conversation at least for a top 3, even maybe the best AWPer in that tournament. From just that perspective, it's crazy how good this guy is for like however amount of time he's been around. The problem with Searson is that you can kind of get lost in kind of the hype train of the way he plays. He's a very, very aggressive player. He always has the AWP. Whenever they have the money, either side, they're going to have it, even on some maps where T-side Inferno, for example, you might not always want to AWP, but Big basically exclusively play it, and Searson almost never rifles. And if I had to guess, that's because A, they probably set the team up in the first place with him to AWP, and B, that he probably doesn't have great rifles, and we just haven't seen it enough to confirm they're bad, but they probably just are. They just physically doesn't get enough game time on them to be that good on the rifles at the end of the day. So with Searson, when you see these great games, when you see he's a very aggressive player, he loves to go for opening picks, to be aggressive, to re-peek angles. When you see the good games, you kind of, there's some bias in the head of some people where you see these games like, this is the average level of Searson when he's just destroying teams like Astralis. But that's not what Searson is. He's not always that consistent. He doesn't always, when you play super aggressively, it's hard. You've got to make really great decisions. You've got to have great team play. He does better than most, a lot better than most, but he doesn't always have great decision making. His best attribute is the start of the round, getting aggressive, going for picks. It's the mid and the late round though. There are more problems and all of this sort of stuff. So Searson, he's not as complete an AWPer as a Zywoo or a Simple, especially a Device. These sort of players, he's definitely not as complete. So at least from the onset, when he's such a massive part of how this team plays, they give him so much space on pretty much every map. As soon as you've got a player like that who could be not always, sometimes a liability in decision making, sometimes make some a bit boneheaded decisions and give up an entry. Like I might even show some of them in the there's one round that sticks in my mind where he's on Vertigo T side and he's like aggressively running into mid looking for a pick, so he just keeps running through mid. He runs a whole fucking wave through mid, and like the jump up area on B and like the CT spawn where you come out of it, he goes all the way to there without out stopping because he's so aggressively looking for a pick, and he just gets fragged by just some guy just sat there like, we're just sitting there thinking, what the fuck? And then when he like swings down the corner, like, yeah. So he does do some weird stuff. I actually made a video called Searson's Unparalleled Playbook on the AWP. I don't want to promote my own fucking channel. I don't care. Go and watch it because, that's a really good example of what Searson's like as a player. That's his strongest attribute, is having a monstrous playbook of like aggressive early round options of picks he can go for or aggressive plays. And it's the rest of the game where he's had some more issues. So that's Searson. That's some of his kind of strengths and weaknesses. I think for Big as a team, in terms of big weaknesses outside of, these weaknesses with Searson are not that big a deal. They're not going to cost them that many rounds, but it is some part of why they're not as consistent as you might think they should be. I think they might have some sort of, not necessarily communication problems. When I look at this lineup and I think who's going to be the vocal players, who's going to be calling stuff, who's going to be arranging the bomb site, who's going to be helping them adapt between rounds and stuff, I look at them and I say, well, Tabson for sure. He's probably a very vocal player. He's calling for them. Outside of Tabson, I think they've probably got a problem where Keto, Searson, realistically, with their experience, and particularly some of the spots Keto plays in the first place, they're probably not going to be that vocal. I'm sure Searson is vocal around himself, but in terms of coordinating a team in a retake or helping them mid-round call, these are massive parts of the game. I can't imagine they chip in that much. They might not be a problem, but they're probably not huge vocal pieces. So I remember particularly during the end of last year, Tizian was the player I was looking at. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to interview any of the players or anything, so I couldn't actually ask them myself. But I'm guessing Tizian is the player they want to be another vocal component. He tends to be one of the more mobile players on the CT side, so he could be very vocal and come into a bomb site and say, you just fucking stay here, I'm going to sit here, let's play this crossfire or something, So when I look at this team, I'm guessing that might be a problem, and that is like a really underlying way that you can have massive inconsistency, where if tabseN isn't being vocal or something's happening on the other bomb site, maybe they're having problems where they can't coordinate themselves fast enough. Maybe they're having mid-round decision problems. Maybe they're not adapting between rounds on each bomb site correctly. Because when they make the calls, when they go for a set play, when they bring out a setup, they look so good that it's a bit baffling that they're not even better than they are at the moment. So clearly during this tournament, everything works. I mean, they had a bit of issues in some of their opening games, but by the end against NiP, they just fucking domed them at the end, didn't they? And then Surson was having like a mega last two series. So clearly by the end, everything was clicking. But in terms of refining this team, some of the problems they've got are probably going to be really hard fixes. And for someone like Surson, I'm guessing experience is really going to be the only way. And if I had to guess, when we go back to LAN, I bet in the first 2 or 3 LAN tournaments, he has a dip and then comes up again when he gets punished for being overly aggressive. And when you're in a fucking stage game and you've got a crowd, I mean, we might not get crowd straight away, but when you win a big stage game, big money on the line, you know, that's when you're going to fall out of being aggressive, and then you'll start seeing these problems with mid and late round because you won't be getting so many opening picks. So that's big. And yep, hopefully they continue this kind of trajectory back to being a top team, because as much as we talked about some of their flaws, they've got so many great aspects of the game. Their set stuff is so fucking good that like this team on their day could still beat anyone. Maybe not consistently, but in the right series, with the right maps, with tabseN calling really well, with everyone being vocal, with, you know, whatever, some particular players having good games, they can beat some seriously good teams. And obviously here they beat Astralis. So hopefully stay in good form, because now it starts to feel like we're getting a really good kind of top end of the scene now with Astralis, sure, Vitality, Na'Vi. Now if Big can get it together, if Cole potentially, Complexity can also come back, these sort of teams, Liquid with Fallen, if all these teams can come together, holy fucking cow, are we going to have like the top 6? Like, it's going to be, I know we're still online and all that shit, but like if we get a really stacked like top 8, just imagine some of these playoff series. They're going to be so good. So at least from that perspective, I'm happy about Big. Should we move on to OG? Because I believe...
Oh, you've probably got a right rant coming on about OG, haven't
you? OG, not that bad, to be honest. So OG, another team in this Blast group. We're basically doing all of them, I guess, in this Blast group. They went out in last place in this Blast group, which on the surface obviously isn't a great result. Going out last place, I think they lost both series 0-2. But you do have to say at the end of the day, they did only lose to Astralis and Big. And even though Astralis might have had some issues, they're still Astralis. And Big obviously won the group. So, you know, as soon as, and you know, they got completely like fisted by these NiP upsets, like to lose the first game, and then I think it went Big, they lost the big game first and then hit Astralis. It might have been flipped, but either way round, to lose the first game and to be faced with that opponent like that for elimination in last place, you're like, what the like, how have we drawn this? So they must have been like absolutely furious that NiP pulled off these upsets in terms of ruining their brackets. So for OG, there is that kind of aspect, but looking at them in this one and outside in other tournaments, you know, this team hasn't been incredible, and maybe for some of their players, you think they could be better. So OG in this tournament, OG overall, are they the OGs? Tell me about this squad. What should we expect from them? Strengths, weaknesses. Give me the lowdown on Alexi B's crew.
So I'm going to make myself very unpopular with a lot of people and I think Issa's got to go. I'm at that point now. I think Issa has got to go from this roster. The problem for me, at least, is 4/5 of it I can make sense of. I like the idea of Valde being an aggressive rifler. I like Mantu on the AWP. I'm British, there's bias there, but I think he's a solid AWPer. I do enjoy watching him play it. I think MBK has a role to play with the experience behind him. He can anchor down some bomb sites like nobody else in the game. He still has experience. He still has firepower behind him. I think he brings a really valuable just experience and time in the game to it. And Alexi B, obviously, I mean, fucking hell, he's a god IGL, isn't he? He just knows how to call shit. He is incredible at what he does. And then I look at Issa, and when I'm looking at Issa, especially T side, I want him to be aggressive. I've got memories of the Hellraisers days in my head, and I know what he can do. I've seen him play this free-flowing, aggressive, wiping out everything in his path style of Counter-Strike. And you see flashes of it. You see, it's almost like when Fallen just shit the bed and went away for a while. You see flashes of what they were, and you go, holy shit, do you remember when he could do that? And then it just disappears for the rest of the game. And I mean, I'm a stats man, I like looking at numbers, but he's bottom fragging in both of those losses. And I mean, for me, at least, he's got to be above Alexi B, despite all the praise I can heap on him. He is still an IGL. He shouldn't be fragging above some of your hardcore riflers. And I mean, for me, if he's not outperforming MBK, he's not got a place on that roster. We know what MBK brings. We know we're not expecting him to be there as a firepower option. We're expecting him to be an anchor, to bring experience, and he does all of this really well. So where's the firepower behind this roster coming from? Mantu, he's AWPing. He does have some fantastic days, but I'd probably put him middle of the pack as AWPers go. He's not going to be doing a Searson or, Brain Zywoo. That's the name I'm looking for. He disappeared on Overpass, who's gone out of my brain today. But he's not going to be doing that. He's not going to be carrying a team on their back. He's going to be top 2, top 3, putting in a consistent performance. So Issa has to be stepping up to that plate, and he's not. He's just not showing up in the server the way I think OG need him to. And as a result, they're getting close in so many of these matches. Astralis, right? 1916 on Dust 2, first map. They should have won that map in my mind. Astralis looked stumbly. They looked awkward. OG should have had that one in the bag. It should have been super fucking simple. Then against Big, 16-12 on Inferno. And this is against a Big where Searson is dropping 24 kills on Inferno. So it's against Big who are popping, and they're still managing to get 12 rounds. And I'm thinking, okay, 12 rounds, if Issa shows up for 2-3 of them, suddenly you've got a game on your hands, but he's dropped 12 frags in the entire map. It's just not quite enough for me to justify him being there. I want to see a dynamic rifler. I want to see someone who's willing to go in first and go in with Valda, right? Give them a second option on those early entries to get those frags, to get something going. I mean, fuck it. At this point, pick up Kirby and see what he can fucking do, because something has to change for OG. They were this big roster picked up by a big brand org, and they're not giving the results to justify them still being there in my mind.
True. Harsh words, but I agree with most of it, to be honest. OG's another tricky one, because OG's a very inconsistent team in general. Yep. Their highs over like the last year or so have actually been pretty good. They've had 3 or 4 tournaments of top 4 or above at Flashpoint. They came second, and we had issues with COVID on the second to last day. So they had to play a game at midnight and then go into 2 best of 3s the next day. There's definitely a world where if we didn't have a COVID problem at Flashpoint, they'd win the whole tournament. They beat Virtus Pro in the final. There is an asterisk there that some people might forget about. So there were some other tournaments across the last year. I think Summit in you might have casted a bit of it actually. The one that was in the middle of last year, I think they did pretty well.
Summit 6, yeah.
Yes, they might have come second in that. They definitely placed top 4 or so in one of the tournaments around that time, even if it wasn't Summit. But regardless, over the whole year, very inconsistent. And they were a team for sure where some people would watch them, and with the same stuff with like Searson, we get kind of confirmation bias, we bias towards the top results. You see them in some games, they look really great. They're a team that's always had pretty good set strats and stuff. And so on some maps, they can just like front run themselves on T side with Alexi be calling. So they're definitely a team that can play really, really well sometimes, but overall they're way too inconsistent. This team seriously inconsistent. They actually were quite consistently good in this tournament, even though they went out in last place. I think they had one bad map pretty much, but the rest of them, they were pretty close to Big and Astralis, of course. Both of them top 5 teams probably right now. So this is probably actually an upper end tournament for them, to be honest, even though they went out last, if you just look at them overall. But if we want to talk about some of the reasons for their inconsistencies, one reason that not many people will talk about is communication. And I have heard the comms a little bit of this team. I won't say too much about it, but I mean, even without seeing the comms, I could have told you this team had like really big communication problems. I can just see the way they're playing in the game, where they're making moves that don't make sense, or they're not coordinating correctly, or You know, there's the amount of times this fucking team smokes the same thing twice at the same time is so stupid. The amount of times I saw them do that at the end of last year was so ridiculous. And the only way that happens is if somebody's not calling correctly or, you know, whatever, sort of someone's in a second language and they're not quite hearing, you know. It might not be that some players, you know, are half-arsing it. It might literally be because they're in second languages. Some of them are not totally competent yet with calling in English and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on with this team, and communication is definitely a big reason, I think, of why they're inconsistent. A problem they had definitely at the start of last year, and you can even see this if you read interviews, is that this team has NBK, it has Valde, and Alexi. All three of these players have in-game leaded at some point in their past. Valde was in-game leading before he came out of North, and then he must have gone, maybe he had a benched period before he went on to OG, but he was definitely calling for the second half of 2019. NBK was almost exclusively calling CT sides from what we know on Vitality, and he has called us sometimes in the past on and off, you know, on those French lineups. I know at the start of this team, when they first came together, NBK was calling CT sides. I don't know if that is still the case at the moment, but even if he is or he isn't, there's still a recipe for disaster here with too many cooks in the kitchen for sure. When you've got all these players that have called at times in the past, you bring them all together into a new lineup. So just from that whole perspective, think about they all want to imprint their own thoughts on the game. And definitely this is a team that might have had problems where during rounds, during games, there's too many voices. And what people forget is that Alexi B is still pretty young. I think he's 23 right now, when I'm pretty sure definitely MBK is older, and I'm pretty sure Valde is older as well. So just from his perspective, imagine those two are being super vocal, saying we want to run these strats, we want to play this way. And, you know, that might not be, that's a really hard thing to do, is to talk over them and say, no, you shut up. We're going to do this strategy and this sort of stuff. So that definitely was a problem. And I thought towards the end of last year, they were getting on top of this stuff. Having Rugger get banned and have to miss whatever it was it 3 months or 3 or 4 months or whatever with the coaching stuff? That kind of helped. Like, however good he is as a coach, he's good. A coach is it's very easy as a coach to help in these sort of scenarios where there's loads of people talking. You just say, shut the fuck up, follow the in-game lead. That's it. That's all you had to sit there and say. It's nothing. There's no tactics involved. So definitely not having a coach would have made these sort of problems worse. So communication, cooks in the kitchen, these are probably problems. They probably got better, but the whole problem I'm starting to see with this team is we've kind of hit the ceiling in some of these tournaments. Where do we go from here? You know, it's been a whole year now, and someone like Alexi B is going to have a team rolling in 3 or 4 months if they're going to, on a tactical level. So I haven't seen that much development in that sense as a team. So I just look at the roster and I'm just like, you know, are we just going to keep playing out these tournaments where best day is a top 4 and most results are 8th, 9th, 10th in a tournament or whatever, or going out last place in this group stage as soon as you meet top 5 teams? Are we just going to accept this continuously for this team? And as soon as you start asking these questions of how do we move up, then you've got to start calling this roster into question. And obviously, someone like Issa, the thing about Issa is, okay, you can look at him in a few different ways. Issa, particularly on the T side, the way you want him to be playing is going in aggressively with a nade. You want him to abuse his mechanics. You want him to have other people do the decision making. He's going to go in, he's going to shoot the enemy players, you know. As much as you might question his, you know, cerebral side of the game, there's no doubt he can shoot players in his crosshair. He can, you know, entry bomb sites. He can, you know, when someone else is doing more of the calling, he can open up bomb sites. He can open up rounds. But the problem is, as soon as you start giving Issa more space, you're taking that away from other players. You're taking that away from Valde, who, with all rights, is like a top 10 player in the world probably at the moment and stuff like this. So as soon as you start giving Issa more space, someone else has got to take a backseat. That's just how it's going to work. And on a team like this with Alexi B puts himself in all the good spots, and rightly so. He is a very good individual player for an in-game leader, and he likes to call around himself. So there's not that much space left in this team. And that's the problem with Issa. We can't give him more space. I can't jeopardize Valde's play at all for Issa. And that's the problem with Issa, because as soon as Issa takes a back seat, as soon as he's not getting the utility, as soon as, you know, he's got to be the one communicating, he's got to be the one making the smart decisions, that's when it goes to shit in this team. And I'm sorry, I've just seen it play out so many. They've like so many issues in mid and late round scenarios where Mantu and Issa, they have issues. Mantu, a bit more forgivable. He's not that experienced. Maybe he's going to make mistakes. Issa, you know, he's been playing at a decently high level for whatever it's been now, 3 or 4 years. And at what point do you have to start questioning him as a player on this roster? Do you change him? Do you not change him? I don't know. I lean towards changing him as a player. Maybe you could go from the angle of let's coach him into being a more versatile player, a more complete player that can play these role-playing spots and we give other people more space. But why would you take the risk? Like, why would you take the risk when there's players we know are provably good in these roles in other teams? And, you know, to float some names, I think someone like Sergey, someone like Shush on Mad Lions, these are all players that I know can play these role player sort of roles. I know they can anchor bomb sites. I know they could, even if they don't know at the moment, they could play we need a player that sort of plays the edge of the map, and we let the other people go to work and he just sits there and he gets, you know, do good comms and he takes space when he has good reads and stuff.
Exactly.
That's the sort of player I want on this team. And Issa right now is not fulfilling that role enough. And maybe he can in the future. You know, I'm not someone that's always like, just axe all these players and change them, because I mean, I've coached enough teams to know that you can change a player a lot if you're a good coach, or you have, you know, or an in-game leader chips in a lot outside of the game. So maybe there is stuff that can be done, but it's definitely getting to the point with this roster where 3 more months of this, I'm axing Issa if I'm in the management of this team. And it's kind of just that simple. And some of those names there, even if you couldn't get those sort of players, that's what I would be aiming for. Maybe you try to get a more experienced player in. I'm not sure you just could at the moment. They're probably all... Maybe some like Kiebi could work. I don't know. Kiebi might not be that right sort of player, but definitely from the experience perspective, he's going to be fine. But there's so many fucking players. Like North has fallen in half. There's so many players like all over the place that I'm sorry, there's got to be somebody. There's got to be some free agents that are probably going to be better than Issa. And even if they're not better than Issa, they're probably worth the risk, in my opinion, to make that swap. Now, the other player I want to talk about, well, I'll talk about quickly about NBK, because NBK is definitely someone where I imagine probably quite a lot of people listening are even like screaming at the monitor, like NBK with his bad stats, he can't put up the numbers, you know, why is he on the team? There is, you know, NBK hasn't been that good individually. There is all this stuff outside of the game where definitely experience, and as soon as we get back to LAN tournaments, someone like NBK is totally invaluable for like going into matches and stuff, preparing for teams, adapting mid-round, communicating, being a vocal player. You know, he brings all of this. So I'm definitely willing to forgive a decent amount on the individual side. I still want to see NBK at a higher level, because NBK is definitely a player where people might not know this. He hasn't always been a role player on all of his teams. He hasn't always been a backseat player. He hasn't always been playing all the shit spots on CT side and letting other people have all the space. At times in his career, he's been a star player. He's been in 2013 and 14. He was one of the best players in the world, top 6, 7 in the world. And, you know, that might have been quite a while ago, but he's not that old. He's still only 26 or 27 or something, you know. And he's been playing for like 10, 11 years or something between Source and Go. So like, he's not a player I've written off on an individual level in the first place. I'd like to see him at a higher individual level, and whatever's going, there's probably something, maybe he's focusing too much on some aspects of the game, helping other players, you know, being a big part of the team. Maybe he is calling CT side and that's detracting from his individual game. Maybe all of this sort of stuff. I hope we do see a high level from him, because on some maps he does have good spots where it's just the way map plays. I won't go into it, but some maps he does have like better spots. Right. The player I really want to talk about is Mantu, because Mantu's a very polarizing player from other people I've spoken to. Certainly at Flashpoint, he was a polarizing player where I'm actually in the camp where I haven't seen enough from Mantu to buy into him totally as an AWPer. Certainly for his experience, he's a good player. He's probably outperforming what you might have expected for someone of his experience level. So good stuff. It's just like, if we want to get into this conversation of, oh, gee, we want to get them, maybe they're borderline top 10 right now. What do they actually need to do to nail top 6, top 5 sort of ranking? And I look at a player like Mantu and I'm just saying, he can't hang with those top AWPers. He is not bringing the same impact. He is not as reliable a player. I've seen him for sure have much more issues during the mid and late round. Much worse than a player like Surson, who I've criticized quite a lot already on this podcast in those scenarios. Mantu is worse than Surson in those scenarios, for sure. So I look at this team and I say, Mantu is another player where if this continually happens, these results, maybe he's another one you question changing. That's definitely a much more controversial thing to say. I wouldn't probably do it now. I wouldn't change him right now. I'd definitely look at Issa first. I mean, you probably look to change him first and then see how it plays out. If it doesn't work, maybe Mantu is the issue. We have to swap him. But at least for now, he's definitely been improving, and maybe definitely from a coaching perspective, maybe you can help him. So Mantu, I'm still a bit on the fence about, but at least for now, if we're going to say get rid of Issa, let's keep Mantu for now. I think something else has to be said is coaching for this team. So obviously Rugger coaching ban came out for whatever it was, 4 or 5 months. And Rugger's definitely a coach where, okay, it's always hard to quantify what a coach does, but there was some really like revealing stuff that I saw. If you read interviews of Alexi B when they were forming this lineup, he was saying stuff like he didn't really know anything about Rugger and stuff like this. And it just gives off the vibe that even from the onset, you know, Rugger, it doesn't sound like he's having that much impact. Maybe he is having loads of impact. Maybe he is like unreal, like in their practice games in terms of adding these strategies. But in a team where they've got potentially clashes with vocal players, where they've got some players like Issa and Mantu who aren't developing fast enough, where they've got overall problems where mid and late round the whole team can fall apart, communication problems. You know, I've got to look at the coach on this team when these are the sort of problems, when it's not always easy to point at the individuals and it's more easy to look at the team overall and say there's big problems. You have to look at the coach and say, you know, maybe they might be better off with a coach that's more experienced with fixing these problems. Maybe they might be better off with a coach that's really great at fixing communication problems, really great at, you know, balancing vocal players, really great at, you know, developing a player like Mantu. Because Mantu's a player, he's got skills for sure. He has some really great games. He's looked improved over the last few months. But I need him to go to the next level. And Alexi B, he's already running the whole fucking team. Like, I can't have him, like, I can't have him getting Mantu up to speed as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know where I really fall on Rugger. I mean, it's always impossible to know exactly what a coach is doing. It's just that was a really strange vibe I got off reading some of their interviews where there's not a great deal of praise for him. As bad as that sounds, there's not, like, for example, for Toby, formerly Big Coach, if you read the interviews of Big going into like the later stages last year, every single interview, 2 or 3 questions, even if they're not related to Toby, the players will bring it up and say that like he's really helped me with this, or question about communication and fucking hell, what's going on? Question about communication, sorry, just fell over. Question about communication, and they're like, okay, Toby helped with this. Or there was one where I think it was Smooya actually was saying like he's never seen a coach like Toby with his work ethic, and I'm not seeing that in these interviews from the OG players. Maybe they have in the interviews I haven't read or listened to or whatever, but yeah, I get the sense that this is a team that could definitely benefit from having a really great coach. I can't really be bothered to think of any names, but yeah. I think, is that it with OG? I can't really think of that much more, but yeah, there's a lot of reasons for their inconsistencies, and the overall point I'm trying to hammer home is that with the problems they've got, I don't see really how they get out of this quickly, and I don't see how they get out of this kind of how they break out of this inconsistency and break out of a whatever 7th, 8th, 9th in the world. That's like best case scenario placing in the world. I don't really see how they break out of this. So yeah, that's why I lean towards suggesting changes as a potential solution. We done, OG?
Yeah, I think we've hammered Issa enough. I think we can leave him alone for a bit.
Rest in peace. Right. So we'll do a few viewer questions. So you guys get to feel like you're part of the show at this time. So we had a question about Jame. And essentially the question boils down, he comes at a few different angles with the question, but essentially, what is Jame's role? How is he a part of VP? How does he contribute towards the success? How does he bounce off different players, more aggressive players like Yekindar, for example? What is Jame's role? And yeah, what part of VP successes is Jame? Give me the lowdown.
Well, James' role is so iconic at this point that it has become in and of itself a meme. So that tells you, you know, a baseline for what we're talking about here. Jame time has become a well-established precedent because we never really, I'm striking my mind back about as far as I've ever watched CS, seen an AWPer play as passively as Jame does and yet still find success. I did a little bit of cursory background on Jame before this, and he's been cruising at a deaths per round of between 0.5 and 0.6 for years. That is, for an AWPer, utterly fucking ridiculous. AWPers, I mean, T side, CT side, whatever you want to take it, whichever direction you want to go, they are the players who you expect to be peaking. You expect to be trying to get picks, make a round happen, putting themselves in risky positions with one of the most powerful guns in the game to make something of it. And Jame is the antithesis of that. He's passive. He likes to sit back. He likes to let the big names on his team, the Yekindars and the Busters of the world, do the work. But he's always there. And it's weird to sort of talk about an anchoring AWPer, but in my mind, that's the best summary of what he does. He knows he's got some incredible players on his roster, right? We've seen it recently. VP are just on an up and up at the minute. You know, you got Yekindar, who can apparently just entry anywhere on the map whenever he feels like it. Buster picks up where Yekindar leaves off. Kika and Sanji, whilst they're not as hyped up as the first two, are still incredible players and are still performing, in my mind, way above where my expectation for them has been. And they just keep breaking the barrier of that expectation. So he's in this system where everything is geared towards big players. You know, you've got Yekindar, okay, he's going to go an entry here, or he's going to hold down B-site Inferno and just get 2-3 kills top banana without even thinking about it, right? Then if he's not doing it, Buster is. I keep going to Inferno for some reason or another, but the amount of entries those two players generate is unparalleled, and the amount of multi-kills they generate on defense is just fucking spectacular, really. So he's put into this system, and it plays to his strengths fantastically, because he clearly doesn't like playing the AWP particularly aggressively. So he'll fall back, he'll anchor things down. He gets still decent, you know, you're talking 70, 80 ADR, you're talking 0.7, 0.8 kills around, somewhere around that mark. So not popping off the top of the scoreboard, but he's always there. He's always churning out kills. He's churning out these numbers. And on top of that, he's always saving the fucking AWP. He's never... AWPers like that, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent, can't afford to be giving away that rifle consistently. They can't afford to be getting picked time and time and time again, because if you're only contributing 78, 80, 82 ADR and only, you know, 0.8 of a kill per round, so, you know, somewhere in the 20s for a 30-round game, you're not going to be getting a $5,000 gun every single time. You're not going to be able to afford it. So he combines this consistent anchoring with saving constantly. Any situation, just low risk. If it's a guaranteed kill, it's what you'd call a high percentage play, right? If it's a guaranteed kill, or he's very likely to be able to make it work, he'll go for it. I'd say if it's less than like a 55, 60% chance, he's not even considering it. 60 to 75% chance he can make the round work. It depends on the teammates he's got around him. 75 or more, he's going for it. Anything below 60, he's just, no, I'm done. I'm saving the AWP. I don't want to die here. I'll keep the economy building. And with the meta, again, the meta really plays to him in my mind, because economy on CT side has become such a bitch to handle. And you've suddenly got this AWPer who's like, okay, I'm going to save this AWP for 12 rounds straight. And I'm not going to give it up, and I'm going to make it painful. And I'm always going to be there just picking off a player every now and again, reminding that T side that I'm here on CT side, or after plants, picking off players as they're looking to come in for the retakes on T side. He's just always there. He's this presence, this anchor for the roster. And as much as I personally think on a lot of other rosters it would not possibly fucking work, he's got just the right combination of players around him, of meta around him, to allow his individual sort of bits and bobs to shine to their fullest extent. I don't know what you think, but in my mind, he's the antithesis of what we expect an AWPer to be. But because of that, he works fantastically within VP's system.
Yeah. So the question specifically kind of asks, is Jame being really passive and sitting back a lot, does that make him a supportive player on this team versus, you know, a star player of Buster and Yekindar? I mean, in general, these terms of supportive and star player, they're quite dangerous terms to use, really. They're kind of terms where, you know, when you start abstracting the game a lot, some people like to bring in these terms, because I'm sure for some newer viewers to the game, it does help to see these teams from a perspective of, you know, this player set up more, this player sits back more. But these terms are quite dangerous, because it's just not really how the game is played. and you don't always have, there's a million permutations for how a round plays out. So even if you have a player in a position where he's going to be throwing the nades for someone else to go in first, or he's setting out someone else, or he's got the bad spot on CT side, anything could happen, and they could end up in a position where they're getting set up to get free frags on a retake or whatever, or they're playing a particular setup where they're getting baited in and they're going to get all the frags. So it is quite a dangerous term to be using. But in terms of this sort of sense, from my perspective, at least on the T side, definitely the team is set up where Yekindar and Buster have more space than the other players. So from that perspective, and Jame is the in-game leader, at least definitely was in the last year, I presume he still is. From that perspective, he probably is kind of more of a supportive player where he sits back. He might even be asking those two players, what do you want to do? I'm guessing it's more like he just says default and they just run in or try and do something. Essentially, I'm pretty sure that's how this sort of team would play on some. At least on the Inferno's a good example. So the reason you keep thinking of Inferno is because Inferno for a long time was their best map. And they'd always pick into it. So you'd see it so much in that. I'm definitely on that map. Buster plays Banana. He's always running in trying to entry people, and Yekindar's always around Boiler trying to take jewels. So on that map, they're really sensational, and that's definitely a map where they can call a lot around themselves. Some maps don't play like that. Train, you're not gonna go for so many solo plays on Train, for example. Yeah. So even that model of Virtus Pro doesn't hold up that well across a whole map pool. I think with Jame, with the style he's playing, he has pretty good impact. I do think the meme has definitely gone too far. For sure, where people think way too much that he's totally a passive player and he sits back and he baits and he saves. That's probably a misrepresentation of how he plays. It's more so if they're on T side, the AWP is probably going to sit back. At least on an execute, the AWP is going to sit back and play the afterplant. If they're on CT side, true, he does tend to be a bit more passive. He's not super passive. He's not ridiculous, but he's not certain. Certain is the polar player of Jame in a lot of ways. And for example, Jame, late round afterplant, he's really good and he makes some really great individual decisions, and he probably calls around himself quite well to set them up. So Jame is a player late round, he's really good. The problem with Jame is that I do think he leaves a bit on the table for Virtus Pro with how he plays. On the T side, you'll see a lot of games where it is Buster and Yekindar being the aggressive players. They're the ones getting map control. They're the ones putting the other team under pressure, when Jame could be doing more. And again, Sursen's a good example of how Big uses him. They like to, if he has a good spawn, he'll go for a pick, or he has a set play he likes to go for. We don't need to change the game for Virtus Pro, but on every map, I want 3 or 4 options for Jame. And if he has a good spawn, let's go for it. And let's just throw more kind of different looks at opponents. And then on the CT side, Jame is a bit perplexing. And the point I made a few times at Flashpoint is when I've seen Jame play, when he is in a man disadvantage and he's forced into a position where you have to play more aggressive, which you have to in a man disadvantage normally. If you're playing 4-on-5, you need to get a bit more aggressive, take a few risks and try and get a pick and make it an even scenario or even more and make it a man advantage for you. And in those scenarios, when there's actually pressure on Jame to be more aggressive, he is more aggressive and he has success. And that's why he's a bit perplexing to me as to why he's not a bigger part of their game, why he's not a bit more aggressive. And I'd like to see that, because that's definitely an angle where VP misses versus some of the other teams. In terms of, I don't want Jame to totally reinvent himself. I think he'll always be a bit more on the passive end of the spectrum. But I think he needs to recognize more that if you're playing a whole half of CS, you need to show your opponents more aggressive looks. When there is an opportunity, when your teammates are saying they're playing in a particular way on this side of the map, and if you use this spawn in this way, you're going to get the entry, he needs to use it more. Maybe it's Jame. Maybe it's the whole system isn't there right now, because this shit is really complicated. This is really high level stuff. When you start getting into, your teammates on another bomb site are going to tell the other players how they're playing and how we can counter it. This is really high level stuff, and maybe VP are just not in that position yet where they can play like this. But if VP wants to go to the next level, that's where I'd like to see it. From the economic perspective, I kind of have a problem with this argument as well. And certain figures in the community push it way too hard, the economic value of an AWP, and if you lose an AWP, all that money. The reality is, if you win the round, you're going to have players alive. They're going to be able to pick up an AWP somewhere and save it. And when you're playing a game of CS, it almost always plays out the one player's got like out of whack money with the others. So there's normally one guy that can afford the AWP anyway. So in terms of like, if you took a very aggressive player like Art, for example, who you could definitely make some sort of kind of argument that when he's playing aggressively, he loses the AWP and you can't recover it and whatever. I don't think it hurts Furia really at all that he loses the money in terms of losing the AWP, because they're just going to save it off someone else or whatever. So in terms of Jame being passive and always saving the AWP over, I wouldn't have said that makes a massive difference. And maybe he's even a bit too passive, and you still want to be going for frags even if you're 2-on-3 and you're gonna save the round. You still try and pick them as they fall out of the afterplant. You still try and get damage done. And the whole idea is every moment in the game, you're trying to like make the high percentage play and always if you can take a 70-30 fight, you always take it, and you just try and minimize the opponent's economy. So if you're like, you're in an afterplant on a bomb site, I don't know, whatever, you're like Dust 2, they've planted on the A bomb site, and you're an AWPer and you're somehow in pit or something, and they're all trapped on the A bomb. So you stay in there and you look for the frag and try and frag them as they exit. So
yeah, for sure.
I don't really know how I've gone on this tangent, but the whole point with Jame is, I think he's a bit misunderstood. He definitely does lean towards being more passive, but he is a decently big part of the way that team plays. And certainly when he has to, he can take a big role upon himself. He can play aggressively. He can, specifically in late round scenarios, he is a monster and he can win them some like serious round. I would just like to see Jame being a bigger part of this team overall. And it kind of just rings of a team that haven't got that much experience in setting up an overall system where you need like, this is going to be a hell of a tangent. Ready for this? So something like people like delusional about in terms of when they look at teams and say, this team's loose, this team's tactical, this team plays this way, this team doesn't have an AWPer, this team, you have all these sort of different aspects and they pigeonhole these teams into playing this way. They're only good on 5 rifle, whatever, And the thing is, a team needs to play in every way. A team needs to be able to run a tactical round. A team needs to be able to play contact heavy. A team needs to be able to have an aggressive AWPer who can also play passive when it's not working, You need to be a very complete team, and they need Jame to be a more complete player, have more aggressive options to be a more complete team. So that's Jame. There you go. A question, I think, for me was kind of about Yekindar. So I said it the last time, mid-rant, I think I said that Yekindar's comms are probably terrible. And someone in the comments was like, why do you think his comms are terrible? He's got decent experience. We know from him in interviews with other people that he says his comms are quite good and he's been working on it. The thing about comms is, at least the way I talk about comms is, for your guys' benefit, I bundle a lot of stuff into comms, and because it is kind of comms. And so, for example, when I'm talking about comms, I'm not just talking about, we kind of talked about here already with some of like the OG discussion. I'm not just talking about from an individual perspective, calling what nades you've got, calling what you can see on the other team, calling, simple stuff between your site partner. There is bigger picture stuff where you come into a retake and someone's got to coordinate your teammates, someone you're executing onto a bomb site late, and, your in-game leader says we're going to B-pop onto this site, and it's on you guys to sort out the nades. It's on you guys to say, I'm going to smoke, I'm going to flash. Like, there's all of these sort of aspects where comms get a lot more complicated. And I'm still willing to bet Yekindar's got a lot to learn in these aspects, particularly with stuff like the afterplants and stuff, where that's really tricky stuff, and there's got a lot to learn. And this is kind of where the idea of comms in my head bleeds. Like, it's so intermingled with the rest of the game that you can't really pull it apart. So as soon as I start saying Yekindar's like, terrible's obviously an exaggeration of how his comms are. It's just like relative. He can only be average at best and on like a top 10 level at the end of the day. Just the reality of his experience. So, and definitely in all these sort of aspects of like being a bigger part of the team, calling around himself, being a really vocal player, helping coordinate his teammates. That's definitely something he'll have to learn over the next year, 2 years. And so saying he's had terrible comms is probably an exaggeration, but comms is it's just such a huge topic. And even if Yekindar, he's still a very young person, and even for him, like, imagine from his perspective, he's come into Virtus Pro, and now his comms are like 2 times better already in like 5 months, and they probably are. he'll go on a talk show and he'll say, you know, we've been working on comms so much. I'm so good at comming now. And it's because he doesn't understand yet. In 2 years, he'll say his comms were really bad 2 years ago. That's what's going to happen. And, you know, it's like all young guys like cocky as fuck about this. Like just how this stuff works. Everyone thinks they know everything until like they realize like a year later, like I didn't actually know anything about that. Like, you know, the reality of the world. But let's move on. Another question we got before we heard some news was, I said kind of offhanded, I say a lot of stuff offhandedly. I said offhandedly that like FaZe should probably get a coach in last time. So somebody asked in the comments, who should FaZe get in as a coach? Now, since then, I was reading through it today. It's kind of half confirmed rumors. Somewhere Cold Zero said that Robban's coming back after his ESIC ban and whatever. Who knows what's actually going on contractually, but at least it seems like Robban's coming back, which is quite annoying because I'd already started thinking about some names as their coach and now it's just sort of tanked my question. So some names that I was thinking before I heard the Robban news. I think Fret is definitely someone who probably is a bit underrated because, I mean, we've talked about NiP quite a lot already. They're just not, they're not a super high caliber team and they haven't had that many results like this outside of this one and Cologne maybe, where they're really punching with like the best teams in the world. So, you know, everyone's opinions on coaches is so terrible in the community where it's just like, if the team is winning, they must have the best coach. You know, that's how it works every single time. And I have people telling me that like Zeus is like a terrible coach now because EG's having some problems. Like, obviously not. Like, he's obviously like a good coach. It's just like his track record's so good. So like Fret's an example where you have the other side of the coin where because NiP, outside of some periods when he first came in with Malmo and 16 and whatever, we won't go into it, but like, Fret is definitely someone who hasn't had enough results for people to like to be smashing them in the face where they're like saying that this guy's like a really good coach. But from what everything I've seen, and if you just go and listen to him on like talk shows and stuff, he's obviously incredibly articulate. The way he thinks about the game is great. His opinions on like how a team should function. I mean, he had some really funny stuff where he's saying like he hates all the stuff of like I told you last time, like he had to get like people out of bed and stuff. Like he hates doing that sort of stuff, so maybe he's got something to work on. But Fret is definitely a coach. Well, I think Fret in quite a few teams, but OG would be another example. Fret would be sick as in like an OG coach. It absolutely, and he'd come with so much respect just from like people that don't know. He's like he's quite he's very veteran, like in-game leader from the in-game 1.6 days. I think he did a bit of Go, but he's just been around so long. You're going to get all that respect from day one, and his game knowledge is great. And even if he's not perfect, he's working with young players, he's developing them, he knows how to, I mean, in a team like NiP, they haven't really got any other father figures, so clearly it must be Fret. So from so many angles, Fret must be good. And I look at a team like FaZe, where presumably Carrigan's going to come in, and if you read that Robban piece, it basically confirms it, because Cold Zero's like, there will be another roster move, like some, like he just says that in it, like, I don't know where he said all this stuff, but he says it in there. So presumably Carrigan is coming in, but when you've got this lineup, presumably when it comes together with so many disparate parts, when there's going to be stuff inside the game and outside the game, I just look at Fret. He might not be a perfect coach, but he's going to bring so much to a team like FaZe, for example. And he was definitely someone I would have thought of. Another one, more controversial, would be Peacemaker. Peacemaker's a tricky one for sure, because Peacemaker's a coach where every single time I've seen his teams in the server, I've never doubted his ability to run a team or run a system or like play some really great CS. Like with Mad Lions, like when they just made the roster move with Hooksy and Refresh coming in, the speed at which that team got online was fucking incredible for a team with 2 roster changes, in-game leader move, inexperienced in-game leader. The speed they got up to speed and played some pretty decent CS over the end of last year was really impressive, and I'm guessing Peacemaker was a big part of that. Obviously, going back to other teams, he just had so many Danish lineups now, and obviously all the Brazilian teams that he was coaching. Like every single team, I've seen so much good stuff from him, and clearly there's some issues outside the server, and presumably, I didn't read all the stuff with Mad Lions, but presumably there's just some disconnects outside the server. He's clashing with people, or whatever the problem is. It's clearly not working with him on a people level. Is what my guess. But yeah, he's another coach that I look at is like, if we had more GM figures in CS or in esports in general, like someone like Buck shouldn't always stop with a coach. Some teams you have someone above the coach that just does pure man management. And I look at Peacemaker and I say, if you got a really good person above him and you just let Peacemaker focus more on the game or more on the stuff, or someone who could like do like conflict resolution around him, whatever the problem is. I look at Peacemaker and I say he's got so much talent clearly in the coaching role that if you got right management around him, he probably would work. Now, does coach have that? Does FaZe have that management? No, probably not. I mean, This team has been a management failure for a long time. I said this ages ago on Counterpoints and went on with Duncan. I was just like, this team is definitely like a management failure when like they're having all these problems of. This was when, they must have started Carrigan at this point. Even then, when they weren't winning that many tournaments, it was clearly like. How am I going on these massive rants? But like when this like FaZe team first came together in Kingwin and G2, like that was a total like management failure. They didn't have good results. Like obviously, you hear all the stories and you just look at them in the server when there's just so many disparate parts and you don't know who's calling and it just doesn't make sense. Even if there's people in the FaZe org that don't know that much about CS, there should have been people that know how a team functions and how you get the best out of people. So, like, I don't know how I've got into this, but, like, FaZe need to work on their management in general, probably. The other person I was thinking, I mean, he's locked up now, would be Kassad. Every time we mention open coaching slot, I'm going to say Kassad, like, to the end of the earth, because he's another person where like, he's got kind of the threat problem, where he's not always had the best results, and even though 100 Thieves or Renegades beforehand, they definitely had some good tournaments or some good placings or consistently on the edge of playoffs or whatever. He's never had the big titles. He's never had the repeated like top 5 world ranking that could really establish himself. Or he must have, when did he coach Mouse? I'm pretty sure he's never coached a consistently top 5 team, put it that way. Yeah. And he's another person where I look at everything he's done in the server and I say, this guy is seriously good. And he's someone, for example, that I have interviewed quite a few. I definitely interviewed 2 or 3 of the players that have played under him and asked them like what he's like as a coach, what he brings to a team. And every single thing I hear about this guy is like sensational about what he does outside the game. Hear him on talk shows, perfect coach, like he says everything right. So he's another one which I would have loved to see a team like FaZe mop up because he's someone a bit like Fret, where I can just say inside and outside the game, this guy's going to be like absolute killer. And he's probably someone maybe they did go after him. I have no idea. But yes. So those are the options. And then we hear about Robban coming in. It's not that I have a huge issue with Robban. If people don't know the circumstances of Robban coming out of FaZe in the first place, that was when Yanko came in. I'm trying to remember the exact problem, but there was something personal or something like it wasn't to do with in-game, or at least they said that. It wasn't to do with like the play on the server. Yeah. So there's not that much bad to say about Robban. It's kind of a bit like the Rugger question, I guess, of what I know Fret and Kassad and even Peacemaker to some extent is going to bring good stuff. I'm not sure what Robban is going to bring outside of being a people manager. And if this team comes together with Carrigan, you wouldn't have thought that's going to be a massive problem in terms of having, there's not a Nico Carrigan conflict anymore. Mm-hmm. And they're bringing in Carrigan, and it sounds like Coldzera wants to play with him. And even though Coldzera is probably quite a big ego on a team, it probably will work. And, Twist has never been someone you've considered as it just probably isn't going to be a huge problem. Obviously, I don't know what it's like in the team, but I look at this team and I look at the Robban pickup and I say, maybe we're missing a trick here with not having someone who can help us in-game enough. And that's kind of my take on it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this coaches, big rant on coaches I've had here.
Coaches are a bit of an alien one for me personally. I think I'm like the majority of people in that I see the 5 players in the server.
Here's a good question, actually.
Go on.
So obviously from my perspective, I've coached a few teams. I've interviewed quite a lot of pro players.
Yeah.
At a tournament like Flashpoint, like the whole time we can interview players post game and we're always talking with the other talent, or there's always so much of people with experience of how a team runs around that. It just sort of like I've had a lot of different ways of trying to think about how a team works or how a coach works. Do you think in general, like in terms of content or the broadcast or whatever, we actually don't do a very good job of explaining what a coach does or what a coach can bring to a team or how a team actually functions behind the scenes? Like, do you find it do you like when I'm just talking through like what a coach does? Is this like bouncing of stuff you thought about before, or is this like, yeah, all these sort of aspects? Did we actually do a good enough job of explaining what a coach actually does? Because when I read Reddit and Twitter, I'd say the answer is probably no. From what I've seen.
I think we well, first off, a lot of the shit you're saying is new news to me. You know, you talk about coaches picking up, you know, getting kids out of bed to play CS. I call them kids. That sounds harsh. I'm 22 now. I'm old. I call 18-year-olds kids. But that side of things, I think the main problem is a coach in CS can be so many different things at once. If it was like, I'm going to go to rugby because it was Six Nations last weekend and I'm still pissed that England lost. You have a forwards coach and he deals with the forwards. You have a backs coach and he deals with the backs. You have a nutritionist who does nutrition. And then you have one head coach that oversees the whole thing. And it's all very, this man does this job, this man does this job, this man does this job. Nobody changes the system. That's how it is. In CS, you get, I mean, obviously, like Cloud9, they've got, you know, Henry as the general manager, coach, someone. So you've got this person to look after everything except the game, and the coach is just there to improve the game. And then you go to other teams, and the coach is sort of everything and just embodies. He's got to get the players to the right places. You know, you've got to imagine he's doing a load of man management behind the scenes, as well as trying to improve their gameplay. And I think it would be much easier, certainly from my perspective, to portray a coach's role on a broadcast, which I totally agree with you. I don't think we do enough. I don't think we do a good enough job of. It would be so much easier to do that if a coach had, I don't want to say a predefined role, but a scope of which he had influence over. Because if a coach in CS was like a coach in rugby, and you could guarantee that a coach was, you know, influencing how they play, their style, their mid-late rounds, you know, maybe coaching up a player to get him to play a certain way, then you could do these huge deep dives on it on broadcast. I'm sure you could. You could look at players over 6-9 months. You could look at how a team has evolved their mid-late rounds. But because you can't guarantee any of that was the coach at all, you can't guarantee the coach is not 90% making sure they turn up on time, you can't really take that risk with a deep dive. I mean, obviously, if you've talked to the coach and he's gone, oh, yeah, you know, I worked, let's go OG. I worked really hard with Mantu over the last 6 months to turn him from this style of AWPer to this style of AWPer, or, you know, try and get him to play more into his mid-late rounds, then great. I can do, you know, you could probably do a 20-minute video on how Mantu has evolved with the help of Rugger over the last 6 months. But the fact is, we don't know. And if we don't know, it's going to be disingenuous on the broadcast. And you'll be able to tell, you know, viewers will be able to watch and sort of tell you're chatting shit out your ass. We've all been there. We've all been sat on a broadcast where we've got to fill for 20 minutes and come up with some crap just to make sure the gap has talk in it. And you can tell. They'll be able to see and they'll go, these guys don't know what they're fucking talking about with coaches. So I think it's a really difficult one to get right. I don't think we're doing enough at the moment. But without either talking to the coaches directly, which some people obviously can do, I can't, I don't know enough people, or sort of ending up with a more regimented structure like Cloud9 have with a GM who does everything that isn't the game and the coach just does the game, it's very difficult to get that across on a broadcast, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a good, but like, for example, in proper sports like rugby, for example, like, I can imagine their coaching teams are like 10 people. So
yeah,
instantly, as soon as you got the big numbers, you're going to start having, it's not just going to be coach, it's going to be strategic coach, it's going to be nutritionist, you know, whatever, personal trainers, whatever, exactly. General man. I don't know exactly what the names would be, but roughly. And then, of course, in CS, most teams are going to have one. And then, like, a lot of the time, like on this sort of thing where I talk about coaches, it's kind of like there's a big combination of speaking to the right people or reading interviews or reading between the lines in interviews. Or it's like I've got to combine so many things together to try and build a picture of what these coaches are actually doing. I actually think, for example, like with Cloud9, I'm going to talk about them next anyway. With Cloud9 being more open in general, we're talking with the community and having a figure like Henry, who does say a decent amount about how the team functions and stuff like this. These are like good things, and teams are way too like they're way too reserved in giving away stuff. Like, how's it? It's not going to damage you saying what a coach does. Like, you can be so vague, and especially for when you're making content for the more general viewer, you could be so base level, you could be so vague and so broad about what you're saying that you never give anything away to your real opponent. So I think in general there's definitely a stigma against giving away anything in the team. They just draw like a black line of they just give nothing away. Whereas maybe we should get a bit more. I mean, there's loads of topics with this, with like how we interview players on broadcasts and whatever. And I mean, for example, for Flashpoint, like the whole idea of blind spot. Did you watch a few of the blind spots? There's the one where we were like in a bar.
Yeah.
Like the whole idea is that you actually have all the players. Like it meant to be a real bar for the tournament, and you have all the players around you, and you can be like mid conversation, and then you can grab somebody in to have a conversation with them, like off the bar. You just say like, I don't know, like James over there, well, maybe not James, Yekindar's got good English. You'd grab him over and you'd ask him some questions. So in like, if you had those sort of things on a broadcast, it'd be so easy just to like, if I'm having a debate with somebody about the impacts of this coach, you could literally just grab them. And then when you're putting them under the mic like that, they're going to give you an answer because they're like, bro, what the fuck? Like, they're actually going to get, and they might be drinking a bit. So they might like be a bit more forthcoming. But as I said, the next topic is going to be Cloud9. This one's a funny one. So Wolfie messaged me last night and was like, what topics are we going to do? And I was like, yeah, we'll do Big, we'll do NiP, we'll do OG. Oh yeah, we'll do C9. He was like, what the? Why are we doing C9? I was like, yes. This lineup tilts me. We're going to do it, even though they haven't played any CS have they in the last week. So it's a bit random to bring them up. But they were a team where, for some other content I was doing, I was watching some of their games, and they're a team I've been thinking about on and off for a while. But obviously, Woxic came out. I can't remember exactly what the statement said, but you can read between the lines that probably again we're looking at a personality problem here. The same with Mouse, or potentially stuff we've heard with other teams. Woxic comes out. The Kassad one, that was clashing with Alex, if I remember correctly. Yeah. There was some sort of divide in terms of how they wanted to play tactically. So those two come out. They had Zeppa, who was a sixth man or a substitute, whatever you want to call it. Now Zeppa's in the lineup. Alex is AWPing. Elmer Puddy's come in as coach. So, should I take this one on first, or have you got anything you want to?
Mate, this is all you.
Oh, should I do it? Okay.
Who's pissed? Do it.
So with this team, the problem with losing Woxic and Kassad and bringing in Zeppa and Elmer Puddy and moving Alex to AWPing is that, put it in simple terms, this whole team for me has like lost its sex appeal. Where like, it's kind of what we talked about. Which team was it where I said they weren't like? Oh, it was the MI. Okay, they're definitely better than that MIBR team, but they like, it's just like this team isn't that exciting for me anymore. Where I mean, for a first start, like Alex AWPing is not a long-term solution, and I've seen this play out quite a few times. Where you got someone that could be pretty decent on AWP, and MSL was a good example. We did exactly the same where they had limited options. They said, I'll AWP, I'll pick up the AWP. And it works. It can work for a few months. They can certainly put up some decent results. But as we talked about so much on this 2 episodes of the podcast already, like AWPing's a really complicated role. And if you combine that with all the stuff an in-game leader has to do inside and outside of the game, fundamentally, 2 months in, I just don't see how Alex is going to keep bringing, like, from an AWPing perspective, be able to bring on a high enough level or bring enough innovation or make them, we talk about how I want to see Jame being a bigger part of the CT sides, adding aggressive options. How is Alex going to add aggressive options and run the team and, integrate new players? Like, it's just way too much. So I look immediately at Alex being AWPing, and, clearly if Woxic wasn't going to work, he wasn't going to work. But where is, like, them going for an A core? Where is them breaking a contract to get someone? Where is looking for a real replacement? Maybe they are, I don't know. Maybe they are looking for a real replacement for an AWPer, and they'll put Zeppa back to being a substitute player. I don't know. But at least the way they're looking at the moment, this is not a long-term solution. And if I was in Henry's position, I would definitely be thinking about breaking some contracts, because I do think that we are a bit... most of the good AWPers really are probably under contract right now, and a lot of them are getting snapped up. But there are still people about, and there's definitely people like an A-core, not A-core anymore. I mean, from what I know, Mouse is in a team with massive buyouts, so maybe you could if you really want to crack some money down. But I'm sure there are other options, and someone like Acre will want to be thinking about. So initially, from that perspective, it doesn't look right to me. From the Zeppa perspective of him coming in, like immediately, the roles in this team are like up in the air. And of course, Alex, he's moved out of all his spots. He's AWPing. It's like, it's just like everything. Okay, this is so this obviously this team was built. We heard all this stuff about we're bringing in players for particular roles. We've got like saying specifically we've got 5 players for this role, and we're going to get this player for this role, we're going to get this player for this role. Well, obviously, as soon as Alex moves to AWPing and Zeppa's playing in weird spots, obviously all that shit is out the window. Like all this stuff they built the team with of like we're putting people in particular roles. Even if 2 or 3 of them are in the roles they should be playing in, obviously there's going to be players moving about in this scenario. So immediately you've got like role problems. And I think you look at this team overall and I ask, where's the firepower coming from? Because as much as Woxic has problems, I know he can get kills. And I can certainly see why they took a risk on somebody like him in the first place. Because if you make him work, he's just going to be good for like just end of story. So yes, from all those perspectives of the in-game, the players, it just doesn't click for me as much as it did. And that's kind of my problem. Now the other discussion is going to be about Elmer Putty. And of course, we've already talked a lot about coaches, where it's very hard to quantify what they do. But the impression I get is that Elmer Putty is he's going to be more of a tactical coach. He's going to be more of someone that's bringing ideas. He's going to be more of someone who's potentially helping players with their spots. These sort of things. And when I look at this team, I want someone who's more experienced, probably, who's going to be a bigger picture. I want a Cassad. I want a Fret. I want these sort of people that can build a whole system. And this team, especially with these roster moves and role changes, this is a tough gig coaching this team right now. And the problem with like having a discussion about Elmer Putty is I'm guessing a lot of people listening watch all of Elmer Putty's videos, or they have done in the past, and they probably think that Elmer Putty could be a really incredible coach. I don't doubt from an in-game perspective that he could be really great. But with all the stuff I've already talked about, like the game is so complicated. There's so much stuff outside the game, so much man management. And these are areas which I haven't seen enough from Elmer Putty to know he has it. He's not someone who I've read particularly a lot about in interviews in terms of his coaching style or whatever, so I can't say that much profound stuff. But I just look at this team now and contrasting Elmer Putty with Cassad. I'm sorry, but that's probably a big downgrade in my opinion in terms of what Cassad can bring to a team. And yeah, so overall the main point I wanted to make was like this whole like losing this XPL angle, and where like the whole team now, it just isn't that exciting. And without changes, I don't see this. This team was built to be top 5, top 10 minimum, and then pushing for top 5 and being contention for tournaments. And I'm sorry, I just don't see it with this lineup. Maybe it might be temporary, but even if it's not temporary and they got in a decent AWPer, I'm still not seeing it, to be honest, at the moment. For me, when they built this team, it was Alex, it was Woxic, it was Cassad. These were their really strong pieces, and it was the other players that were questionable. And now we've lost 2 of those. And Alex has definitely got a lot on his plate in terms of changing roles. So, there's loads of angles with C9, but it's just a team that I haven't seen that many people talking about in general. And I think they could be in trouble, actually, moving forward. I don't know what they're playing. They must be playing in the Katowice. I think they are. I think they're playing Spirit in the first game. I saw it earlier.
Yeah, they are. That'll be a good
proving ground. But yeah. I wouldn't be gobsmacked if there are changes in a few months. So, with this team. There you go.
Rant over?
It wasn't that bad. I wasn't swearing that much. Well, let's do the big one. Not the big one. The one that we're all here for. It's Complexity. So they literally, what would it be now? 2 or 3 hours ago, that game must have finished.
Yeah, about that. So
again, in Blast, this is the different group. They were playing Vitality in the opening game. Vitality, probably the second best team in the world right now. Maybe some of you would say it's Na'Vi, whatever. They're definitely up there, top 3 minimum. And kind of the same stuff with Astralis. We're saying they're going to come into this game in top form. How can they lose this? They've got such good fundamentals. How can they lose this game? And of course, Poizon's first game back. This match, I think after the first half on Mirage, was that the first map? After the first half on Mirage, this was literally all coal. And I think they lost Complexity. They lost like 2 rounds or something from then on, or something absolutely bonkers. Maybe it was 3 or 4. I can't remember. It was definitely like a minuscule number of rounds they lost from this first half onwards. So, yes, initial reactions to this one. Poizon coming back, JKS, whatever, Vitality losing. What do you make of this result?
thank fuck for Poizon.
Mm.
Thank the Lord that he can come back into a system and take one map to start popping off again. That was my concerns. Right, let's start at the beginning. People wrote Complexity off, people wrote JKS off because they were being fucking idiots. You take an AWP out of a system, we discussed it last week, you fuck up the system. You end up playing with stand-ins for forever. You're not going to be able to get a new player into your systems with stand-in AWPers. It's just not going to happen. So he, whilst not having a blinding series individually, he was still present. He was doing more than I've seen him do for the team pretty much since Poizon became ill and went out of the roster. And he started to show sparks of that form that I know Complexity picked him up for. So he fills me with a lot of hope. Then you bring Poizon back into the system, and I've been very vocal in my concerns about, yes, he's a professional. Yes, he's a tier 1 AWPer, arguably top 5. How long does it take him to get back up to speed? You see it in every professional sport in the world. A player takes a long time out injured. They come back. They expect to instantly be on that form again, and they're not, and it breaks them mentally. And as an AWPer, so much of your game is mental. So when he gets into that Mirage map, he's quiet, he's slow. Obviously, you're coming up against ZywOo, who there's arguments he's the best AWPer in the world, at least the best all-rounder. He's slow. He's not hitting his shots. He's getting outpicked by ZywOo. I think over the map, he went, 13 and 19. So for a Europa, that's not what you want to see. It's a little bit concerning, but his teammates rallied around him. Config dropped a 30 bomb and just went straight vintage Config. It was beautiful to see. Despite ZywOo, 23 and 18, 1.35 HLTV. Rest of the team, not quite there. The systems didn't seem to click. It was very odd watching a Complexity roster who, for the last 6 months, have been associated with not clicking and the system's not working. And you've spoken about their problems on Mirage, right, with their roles on Complexity. I'm sure you've said something before.
Said a lot of shit.
Said a lot of shit, yeah. It's this team who you're traditionally used to watching implode on Mirage, and instead, arguably, the top 2, if not the best team in the world right now, are imploding on Mirage against Complexity. So it was odd to watch, but incredibly gratifying to see Config coming back into his form. Rush had a blinder of a game, and then JKS just consistently. And then Overpass happened.
Yep.
And Overpass happening in the way it happened was one of the single most brutal things I think I've ever witnessed. Nobody even started for Vitality. I mean, the very fact that it was only an 18-round game, it was a 16-2. ZywOo, in 18 rounds, found 2 fucking kills, 28 ADR. You don't see those stats. That doesn't happen with ZywOo. I think Professor tweeted that the worst he's ever been is like a 0.67 HLTV. He's on a 0.28. It was just abysmal, and the team were abysmal behind him. I mean, RPK, 6 kills. Masuta, 4 kills. Apex, 8 kills. The only player who I think you can say even vaguely showed up for the performance was Shox with 12. But as much as Vitality was sat there quietly imploding and, sparks flying, parts going off through windows and all that shit you see in comics, Complexity started clicking. Again, blame F. Blinder of a performance. Poizon dropping 20 kills. I do think Overpass really plays to AWPers. I think it's an absolute playground for them. And it showed. He just looked like his old self. And the fact that it only took him one map to get to that place fills me with so much hope for Complexity moving forwards. I like their system. I like what they have. I like the pickup of JKS despite Twitter fucking hating him for months. I think that they've now bought themselves a little bit of breathing room to go, okay, Poizon, let's get, honeymoon game, sure, because you've been out for 6 months. Let's get you back into this system. Let's start building again, which they've proven they can do, right? They got laughed off the stage when they said they were a juggernaut with their initial 5. They proved that they can build into a serious contender for top 3 teams in the world. And I have no doubt with JKS on the system, they can do it again. No doubt.
True. So from the JKS angle, you're right that the amount of people that are just like, were saying community figures and the kind of the general fans, they were kind of writing him off and saying he's got big problems and something. I mean, clearly something isn't working with JKS, or at least wasn't working until this. I mean, there's just one series. We need to see it play out a bit more. Point I've made a couple of times is that we kind of discussed it a little bit already. When you've got when you're interchanging the fifth player, probably practice is a nightmare. JKS probably wasn't fully integrated into his role or his new spots or whatever with the system by the time Poizon came out. So there's other factors outside of just the gameplay for JKS that were factoring in, where you could just see, well, potentially he was having more problems adjusting to the system in the first place, just off a back of practice. Or, some players might not, you might not be as motivated to play. It's not necessarily JKS, but maybe some of his teammates aren't. There's so much shit that goes on when you've got a player that's swapping out in the fifth place spot in your team. Yeah. So in terms of this one, I got a tip off from a pro player that a potential problem for this team with JKS is role changes when JKS came in. So on the CT side, this team makes a lot of sense with the roles. So in really simple terms, the players that are passive, the players that are the anchors, the players that sit still and hold the bomb sites, that's going to be JKS and Rush on this team. And then the rotators, the ones that are getting aggressive, the ones that are on the move more, the ones that are calling around themselves are going to be BlameF and Config. Both these players are very suited to this sort of role. They're both going to be very vocal. They're both going to be, good at moving around. And someone like Config probably loves having the space and loves to move around and get aggressive. And then obviously Poizon or whoever the fifth was AWPing. T side is the problem. And the problem is that Obo and, I haven't gone through that many games to confirm exactly what's going on, but Obo and JKS are definitely very different players. Obo, less experienced, more aggressive, he's going to follow the lead of someone else saying blame F calling, we're going to go for this control, you're going to go in aggressively and go for this pick. JKS, very different. JKS is going to play the edges of the map, he's going to stay back towards late. So you have a void where Obo was, and from what I was told, potentially blame F is someone that's had to go more towards the aggressive end of the spectrum to fill this void that was left in this player swap. And that's potentially where some of the problems are coming from. I can't see that being as I was saying the whole time, it still felt to me probably more so that it was going to be swapping out an AWPer was going to be the biggest problem, and I stand by that. But this potentially was an issue, and this is definitely a question moving forward. Obviously, in this series, there's firing in all cylinders. Just smashing them in that overpass pick was Vitality's pick, and they got 2 rounds. So obviously, Complexity were doing pretty well. So there's definitely a question of them role-wise, and in terms of JKS moving forwards, as much as I just defended him, I still need to, now if Poizon's presumably back at good health and they're going to play a few tournaments, if in 2 or 3 tournaments JKS is still having problems, then maybe there is a bigger underlying issue that something is going on where, I don't know, from what I've seen, the JKS's spots he's playing, at least on the CT side, pretty much match what he played on 100 Thief, or at least are so close that I can't imagine he's having big problems in that sense. Maybe on T side there's more problems, I don't know, but at least from the JKS perspective, if in 2 months and they've been playing with a full lineup and he's still having problems, then let's have a real conversation about, has this not worked? Should he go to a different team? And obviously, from what we saw of JKS on 100 Thieves and going back to Renegades and all the way back and whatever, we know he can be good. We know he can put up good results. But he was actually, to be fair, for a player like JKS, he's actually someone where we've only really seen work in, admittedly, it was a very changing system, but he hasn't really really played in one team. It changed a lot over those years, fair enough, but he's not someone that's been in a lot of different teams and a lot of different leadership and a lot of different coaches. He's had a few in-game leader changes, but in a very gradual transition where it's months between them and one player change. So probably for him, this is like a massive shock to the system. Imagine coming in, all these new people, new leadership, new coaching staff, whatever. So I can imagine it's a big change for him, but as I said, if in 2 or 3 months he's still having issues, then we'll have a real conversation. And, maybe I'll do a video. I don't know. We'll see if it's still a big community topic at that point. But for the moment, I don't think it should really be, assuming they still keep up a decent level in the rest of this group stages. Yeah, I think let's kind of end this conversation for now and pick it up later if it's still an issue.
Yeah, you pretty much summed it up, right? This is the get out of jail free card. It's gone now, right? Poizon's back in the system. But the one other thing that I did want to touch on that I completely fucking forgot because I'm a muppet is the fact that someone pointed out on Twitter, again, I just stalk Twitter, it's my thing, that this was probably the first time JKS had played in a room with all 5 players on Complexity. He'd been playing out of a hotel room. He'd probably only met Rush. And the thing that stood out to me off the back of that statement is remembering watching those player cams when they were just getting trounced. They just permanently looked livid. Like, even if someone had clutched a big 1v3, Blame F just fucking stone-faced, right? Just didn't care. And then you contrast that to this first game, right? There's a picture circulating Twitter of Rush just doing dumb shit. And they're all pissing themselves laughing. Like, Config looks like he's comfortable, having a great time. Blame F is just looking at Rush like he's fucking got Satan inside him or something, because he just looks mental. But it's just a complete change in how that team dynamic appears to me. Obviously, as an outsider looking in, you're never going to get the full picture. But for all the times we talk about teams having personality problems and clashes and issues, I think Complexity had the worst of it in that they could never build that team vibe to start with. And I think the timing of all of this, of Poizon coming back, of them finally being able to play together as 5 people in one room and build that team up, I don't think it could be better. I think as long as they continue this form, I can justify in my head them staying like this, well, fucking indefinitely, right? I mean, this was a complete stomp. I don't expect it to stay like this. I definitely think there's going to be a dip coming up sometime soon. But Complexity have proven time and time again, they're willing to stick with players. They're willing to build a system that works. And in my mind, at least, this system should work.
Yeah, they're a bit of a crazy team, really. Like, when you first saw that, especially like a year ago, and they really started having a breakout performance, that was whatever it was, Blast Spring Groups or whatever they called it. It was actually one of the last lands of the year as it played out. So they've got like a big accolade there. So yeah, from it, like, you just look at the team on paper. Even today, you can look at the team on paper and think, this is a bit wacky, isn't it? We've got a lot of things going on here. We've got a lot of kind of different cultures and personalities, different backgrounds. But clearly, this is a team where the amount of work they must have put in outside of the server to get stuff rolling. And yeah, they're definitely a team which feels like when they're playing well, they're really a lot more than the sum of their parts, or at least maybe in the sense that if you're playing like Football Manager, you'd look at this team thinking it would not be that good, but actually it plays out really well. And it's kind of I think it's a good statement of some of the other teams that just like waste away talent, when this team feels like, at least when they've had the successes, they're getting a lot out of their players, and they made some really like shrewd roster choices, which is another reason why it's just like the idea that JKS is just going to be a complete train wreck when they made so many like prudent decisions with their roster since bringing it together is a bit hard to buy into yet. Maybe it won't pan out in the end, but every other case pretty much says that, you know, they make some pretty solid. I mean, Poizon's a player that did he come straight from Windigo into? He must have been something like that. He's a player that like few teams would have taken the risk on, and he's played out pretty well. I mean, I still need to see. I mean, we haven't actually seen him for 2 months or whatever it's been now, so we do need to see him play a bit more. But he's another player where kind of out of nowhere he's instantly punching at a good level, and he's not a player I've watched that much of, to be honest. So I can't say anything that profound. But from what I have seen, he's quite a fairly well-rounded player, at least for his experience level. So yeah, this Complex is just a good example. Like, they just feel like a well-run team, to be honest, from what I can tell. And it's potentially a bit surprising because they're definitely Complexity with some of their older lineups were not well managed, or at least from the outside. But at least from stuff like Jason Lake says, this is a team that is willing to make the hard choices if it came to it, and they did, and they got this lineup together well. And potentially other teams should learn from this. I mean, it'd be interesting to parallel them against Cloud9 because they're in a fairly similar. I mean, Cloud9 now is in a fairly similar scenario to what Complexity would have been. I don't know what exact period, end of 2019 or whatever. And it would be very telling if Cloud9 make the hard decisions like Complexity did, or if someone like Henry comes out on Twitter and they're having bad results and just says, we're going to cut off these players. If you want to win tournaments, come and join. Like, it's like if a similar scenario, but I'd be quite surprised if it did play out. But like, they actually, I mean, Jason Lake's such a character in the first place. Some of the stories you hear about him, like behind the scenes, and I've never spoken to him. I've seen him a couple of times at events. If you want a good example, a good one. So ECS Season 7, middle of 2019. This was Obo's first event. and Jason Lake came over for it. I don't know if he would have anyway, but presumably coming with Obo was a big thing, getting him used to the first tournament. But anyway, during the group stages of the event, there was no crowd. They still did the games on the stage, and the if you were doing media, you're doing interviewing, you met up with the players behind the stage to interview them. And I remember distinctly, Complexity were like, they might not even won the map, but they were like winning rounds, and we were all like, you have to come to the media area before the end of the game to get the players as they walk off stage. And I just remember Jason Lake must have been the only person in that room, and you could hear him clear as day, just like screaming or like off his lungs as this team was winning. And like, where else was it? It must have been the London Major as well. Like someone who I was hanging out quite a lot with was taking photos. He got some really good pictures of like Jason Lake going mental. Because like they made top 8 at that major when nobody would have expected it. So in general, like Jason Lake, I mean, I don't know how we got onto Jason Lake here, but in terms of like a figure, like he fucking like he's got CS in his veins, this guy. And yeah, just in general, I always respect people like that or teams like that. I mean, so for example, the thing I liked about the previous MIBR lineup is it was so obvious that they like fucking lived to play CS. You could just see it. I mean, I'm sure enough people have seen all the clips of them on the player cams and stuff, but I don't know. I always enjoy seeing people who like when the game's live, like fucking nothing else matters. Like this, like winning this game is more important than breathing for some of these people. But yeah, I've always enjoyed that with Jason. Like, there you go. Where are we? 1 hour 46. Fucking hell.
Jesus, we do drag these on a bit, don't we?
I didn't even have that many topics. I cut it down. I had less topics than last week. I was like, this is going to be about 1 hour 10, isn't it? It's 1 hour 45. I probably should have said during the questions, same as last time. Questions I was actually quite impressed by the questions we had in the description. And we bounced on so many topics here. There's bound to be some. And potentially, I mean, there's going to be more results over this week that we can delve into. Maybe we'll even think about getting guests. I mean, what a bizarre concept that would be. Whoa. We've really been moving up in the world then. So, I don't know. I think we've covered all the topics. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to smash out.
Nah, mate, we've talked about literally every single thing that's happened in CS in the last fucking week.
Even Cloud9, which didn't happen. Even Cloud9 and Jason Lake, which didn't happen at all, we managed to cover. That's how good this show is. We cover the news that hasn't even happened. But yes, questions down below. We tried to cover them. As I said, they were good questions, actually. So good shit. Keep it up. Let's have it makes my job easier. I don't have to think of anything. I just get these questions pasted in my inbox. So keep that up. Put them in the comments, Twitter, Discord, whatever. Throw them at Wolfie, whatever. He's on Twitter anyway all the time by the sound of it. So just tweet at him.
Yeah, exactly.
If you wanna do anything. So that's us. We'll be back next time. Sub, Discord, like. My Twitter, Wolfie's Twitter, that'll be in the description this time. I forgot to put it in last time. But it will be in there. I'll even put it in the comments below so people can see it. But I think we're done here. And yeah, we'll catch you next time around.